Hi, I'm Robert Hackworth, and I'm the Security Program Manager for KDE. This is the second in a series of security videos, data access and data sharing. Now that you're familiar with FERPA, House Bill 5, and House Bill 232, and what personally identifiable information is, I want to remind you that it's not just PII that is considered confidential. You may be thinking this information doesn't pertain to you, but in reality, most of us come in contact with confidential information every day. It can include personnel data, even if it's just your own information. It could also be found on various application forms. If you've been on an interview committee or even assisted putting together an interview, you've probably had access to these forms and come into contact with that information. Student information and school district personnel information is obviously considered PII, but even financial information without PII could be considered confidential in many cases. Other examples include legal documents and draft RFPs. Even if something is considered subject to open records, doesn't mean it should readily be available. The focus on this training is on PII, but priority of maintaining confidentiality of data should be a priority for everyone, regardless of the data or document type. Employees are granted access to PII only when the duties of their job demand it. Not everyone at KDE has the same need to be able to access personally identifiable information. Need to know should always be a condition before any access is requested or granted. Requests for access must be approved by each employee's manager, director, or associate, depending on the level of access needed. If you remember back to your first few days of work, you'll remember signing the affidavit of non-disclosure. Each employee signs this HR form agreeing to, first, not permit access to confidential data to unauthorized persons. Managers, this should be a consideration when deciding who should access, and if there is truly a need to know, no one should share a user ID and password with any other employee. In addition to access, we've agreed to maintain the confidentiality of data we have access to and not reveal or use information for non-KDE purposes. This means we should only be accessing records needed as part of our job duties. Accessing records just because you're curious or want to know something about a family member, that's strictly prohibited and subject to disciplinary action. Each employee has the responsibility to report any instances of missing data inappropriately used or taken off-site too. Employees with a virtual work assignment should maintain a heightened awareness of security when accessing or using data off-site. Always take extra provisions to keep data secure. Now, we've all agreed that we understand laws governing unauthorized disclosure of confidential data, FERPA, and penalties for unlawful disclosure. These videos are a reminder of best practices. As stressed in the previous training session, PII, even in aggregated form, can lead to identification if not suppressed. It's important to understand that it's not just names and other identifiers that are confidential. It's also characteristics of an individual. As data sets are created and made available, suppressing small counts to protect individual identity is critical before sharing data sets. Each of us is responsible for reviewing documents and files before they are shared to avoid inappropriate disclosure. And it's very important to remember that our customers are counting on us to make sure we protect their data. Lastly, we all agree that we are responsible for keeping our user ID and password secure. This means don't share under any circumstances. We sign the affidavit of non-disclosure when we are hired. Employees who have access to systems that contain PII are now required to sign annually for access to continue into the next year. If you have access to PII, you must always respect the security of this data, just as you would your own personal information. Here are some simple things you can do to ensure data is protected. Keep your user ID and password secure. Don't write it down. Create a strong password, something you'll be able to remember, like a phrase that means something just to you. Don't use a password that will be easy to guess, like a pet's name, the season of the year, the month, or the word password. Believe it or not, those are all too common, and hackers know that. They're counting on you to use those easy passwords. When accessing records off-site, ensure your network is password protected. If you are using an unsecured connection, log in through VPN to add that additional layer of security. And whatever you do, don't print reports with personally identifiable data unless absolutely necessary. Paper, just like electronic stuff, gets lost and left behind. Shred documents that have been printed and purge files that are no longer needed. There are many other common sense things each of us can do to protect PII. It's always good to keep these in mind. 1, do not use PII in emails. Use the identifier, but don't include other identifiable data. When we think of identifier, that's system identifier and not Social Security number or SSN. The Social Security number should never be used. If you get an email message that does contain PII, remove the PII and respond back to the sender with a reminder that it's just not good practice, potentially illegal. Delete the original email so the PII doesn't become part of your email archive. If you have an identified need to share confidential information, KDE does have a secure file sharing solution that can be set up for individuals. Move-it accounts can be requested by contacting the Enterprise Data Office liaison. Requests for accounts must come through managers or directors to be approved. Also, documents and presentations should not include PII. Just like this one, we're not showing Social Security numbers just to show you what one looks like. Ensure that screenshots and presentations or other documentations do not contain identifiable information. Even if you didn't create the presentation, if it comes to you, review it before sending it on. Remove identifiable information or create dummy records to avoid a potential data breach. Verify that documents you receive don't include PII, just like I said. We all share the responsibility of protecting confidential data. We've talked about how we access data. How we use the data, how we save the data is just as important. PII should not be saved on SharePoint, OneDrive, your local hard drive, or any other external device or media. Access to PII is always limited to those with a need to know, and not everyone needs to know. Shared drives are not a place for confidential data. KDE does maintain a secure file server just for confidential information. If there is a need for this level of data storage, work through your data governance member and the KET service desk to create a folder with appropriate permissions. Files saved should be periodically reviewed to determine if there is a need to continue to maintain them. If there's not, permanently deleting files is considered a best practice. Whether you are storing PII or other confidential information, it's important to analyze the options for storing data and make good choices with security of data considered. When you receive requests for information from researchers, vendors, or other agencies, it's also important to remember there are limitations on how we share data and who we share it with. All requests for PII should flow through the Division of Enterprise Data. There is a data request link off the researchers page of the KDE website that can be used to request data. This can also be used for internal and external requests. Rather than try to respond to a researcher directly, refer the individual to this page and the standard process. The Enterprise Data Team is responsible for ensuring data releases are allowable under FERPA. Agreements are in place to allow data sharing and that data is shared securely. Enterprise Data and the folks there work directly with the Office of Guiding Support Services to ensure legal disclosure. If the need to share data is part of the contract, it is important to ensure that contracts adequately cover the requirements of FERPA and new state data breach provisions. Discuss with the Enterprise Data Team the needs and contractual requirements to ensure data sharing is allowable and the contract addresses required elements. To conclude our discussion of data security and sharing, I want to leave you with a few reminders. Number one, avoid sharing PII if at all possible. With use comes risk. Minimize that risk by just not sharing. Discourage districts from sharing PII. If you have to share personally identifiable information, utilize secure mechanisms. Explore the options with a division of enterprise data. They would love to talk with you about it. Number four, store your data securely. Password protect your files and store data on KDE's secure network. Call the KET service desk and they'll be happy to help you with that. Always suppress aggregate level files before sharing unless the contract or MOU is on the file. Contact your office's data governance member or enterprise data or anyone there for help on developing best practices. Thanks a lot for participating in the Data Security video series. The third and final video is on data breach. I'll see you then. Thank you.